Welcome and good evening. You don't need to watch the screen tonight. In fact, it's better if you don't. Just let the sounds settle around you. A quiet voice, a slow rhythm, a thought that might keep you company as the night deepens. You can close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and picture the earth as it once was. Not as the world you know, but as something older, stranger, and full of stories we've forgotten. If you enjoy wandering through history like this, quietly, gently, half awake, you can always come back for more. These stories are here whenever you need them, waiting in the dark like small, flickering lights. Now, let's begin tonight's journey. When people talk about civilization, they usually mean us, our cities, our inventions, our stories, the rise of agriculture, the first fires, the shaping of metal and glass. We measure time from the first walls we built and the first words we wrote. And we tell ourselves, quite confidently, that this is the beginning, that the story of civilization began with us. But tonight, let's drift away from that idea, if only for a while. Because the Earth is very old. So old that all of human history, every empire, every revolution, every poem, every dream, would barely fill the last second of its clock. If you compressed Earth's entire 4.5 billion year life into a single day, then humans appear sometime around 11:59 p.m. Civilization, the kind we recognize, is a single breath before midnight. So, what about everything that came before? What if this moment we call history is not the first, but simply the latest? It's easy to assume we're unique, that no one before us built, thought, or dreamed quite like we do. But when you look at the Earth closely enough, something unsettling happens. You begin to see how completely it forgets. Mountains rise and fall, oceans open and close, continents drift. Even the rocks beneath our feet, ancient, solid, unmoving, are part of a planet that remakes itself every few 100 million years. The surface of the Earth is not a museum, it's a canvas that keeps being repainted. If an entire civilization had existed before us, cities, languages, stories, lives, the Earth would have erased almost all trace of it. A few atoms of carbon here, a trace of metal deep underground, a pattern of isotopes in ancient clay that no one yet knows how to read. Time doesn't just bury the past, it digests it, and that thought, quiet, almost unthinkable, is where tonight's story begins. Imagine for a moment standing at the edge of a vast, ancient landscape. The air is warm, the ground beneath your feet is familiar, but somehow alien. The stars above you look almost the same, but the constellations are twisted slightly, their alignments shifted by the slow wobble of Earth's axis. You are still on Earth, but not our Earth. Perhaps this was a world that existed 100 million years ago, or a billion. Long before the first humans, before even the dinosaurs, before forests learned to breathe oxygen into the sky. And perhaps, just perhaps, life here had already done what life does best: adapt, evolve, and reach upward. We like to think intelligence is rare, but intelligence in a sense is just another survival trait, one that might arise wherever life has enough time, and time is something the Earth has never lacked. Could there have been other civilizations, long before ours, that reached some height of awareness? Maybe they weren't human. Maybe they weren't even like us in any recognizable way. But maybe they built, or created, or dreamed, and then were swallowed by time. When you think of it that way, the silence of history begins to feel less like an answer, and more like a question. Welcome and good evening. You don't need to watch the screen tonight. In fact, it's better if you don't. Just let the sounds settle around you. A quiet voice, a slow rhythm, a thought that might keep you company as the night deepens. You can close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and picture the Earth as it once was. Not as the world you know, but as something older, stranger, and full of stories we've forgotten. If you enjoy wandering through history like this, quietly, gently, half awake, you can always come back for more. These stories are here whenever you need them, waiting in the dark like small, flickering lights. Now, let's begin tonight's journey. When people talk about civilization, they usually mean us, our cities, our inventions, our stories, the rise of agriculture, the first fires, the shaping of metal and glass. We measure time from the first walls we built and the first words we wrote. And we tell ourselves, quite confidently, that this is the beginning, that the story of civilization began with us. But tonight, let's drift away from that idea, if only for a while, because the Earth is very old. So old that all of human history, every empire, every revolution, every poem, every dream, would barely fill the last second of its clock. If you compressed Earth's entire 4.5 billion year life into a single day, then humans appear sometime around 11:59 p.m. Civilization, the kind we recognize, is a single breath before midnight. So, what about everything that came before? What if this moment we call history is not the first, but simply the latest? It's easy to assume we're unique, that no one before us built, thought, or dreamed quite like we do. But when you look at the Earth closely enough, something unsettling happens. You begin to see how completely it forgets. Mountains rise and fall, oceans open and close, continents drift. Even the rocks beneath our feet, ancient, solid, unmoving, are part of a planet that remakes itself every few 100 million years. The surface of the Earth is not a museum, it's a canvas that keeps being repainted. If an entire civilization had existed before us, cities, languages, stories, lives, the Earth would have erased almost all trace of it. A few atoms of carbon here, a trace of metal deep underground, a pattern of isotopes in ancient clay that no one yet knows how to read. Time doesn't just bury the past, it digests it, and that thought, quiet, almost unthinkable, is where tonight's story begins. Imagine for a moment standing at the edge of a vast, ancient landscape. The air is warm, the ground beneath your feet is familiar, but somehow alien. The stars above you look almost the same, but the constellations are twisted slightly, their alignments shifted by the slow wobble of Earth's axis. You are still on Earth, but not our Earth. Perhaps this was a world that existed 100 million years ago, or a billion. Long before the first humans, before even the dinosaurs, before forests learned to breathe oxygen into the sky. And perhaps, just perhaps, life here had already done what life does best: adapt, evolve, and reach upward. We like to think intelligence is rare, but intelligence, in a sense, is just another survival trait, one that might arise wherever life has enough time. And time is something the Earth has never lacked. Could there have been other civilizations, long before ours, that reached some height of awareness? Maybe they weren't human. Maybe they weren't even like us in any recognizable way. But maybe they built, or created, or dreamed, and then were swallowed by time. When you think of it that way, the silence of history begins to feel less like an answer, and more like a question. Time, on Earth, doesn't move the way we imagine it. We think of it as a line, something we can measure, follow, and record, a steady flow from then to now. But the truth is softer, stranger. On this planet, time doesn't flow in straight lines. It loops, it folds, it erases itself. When we say history, we usually mean the last 10,000 years, the sliver of existence since humans began to write. Everything before that feels blurry, distant, unfinished. We call it prehistory, as though it were a prologue, something that happened before the story really began. But Earth's story didn't start with us. It has been writing itself for 4.5 billion years. Let's pause there for a moment. 4.5 billion. It's a number so large it stops meaning anything. You can't picture it. You can't feel it. But if we tried, if we condensed the entire history of Earth into a single calendar year, then the dinosaurs would have appeared around December 13th. They'd rule the world for a couple of weeks, and then, just before the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, humans would arrive, within the last few seconds of December 31st. Civilization, the first farms, cities, and roads, those wouldn't show up until the final blink before midnight. That's how small we are in the scale of time. So, what about the rest of the year? The other 364 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds? Who, or what, might have come and gone in those lost ages? It's a question that makes you feel both tiny and infinite, because it reminds you that the Earth forgets easily. The The surface of our planet is alive, but not in the way we are. It shifts and breathes on scales far beyond us. Mountains rise and crumble. Oceans form, evaporate, and form again. Entire continents drift like slow ships through geological seas. Every 100 million years or so, the face of the planet remakes itself completely. Everything that once stood on its surface, forests, rivers, bones, and even civilizations, is slowly drawn down into the crust, melted, and reshaped into something new. To the Earth, we're not history, we're weather. That's why, even with all our instruments, all our satellites, all our deep core samples, we know so little about the deep past. It's not that the records aren't there, it's that the records don't survive. So when scientists say they've found no evidence of earlier civilizations, what they really mean is, the slate has been wiped clean too many times to know for sure. The past isn't missing, it's been recycled. Think about this. If human civilization disappeared today, if every city fell silent, how long would it take for our presence to fade? In 100 years, plants would claim the buildings. In 1,000, the last steel would rust. In 10,000, only faint traces of concrete might remain, buried under new layers of soil. In 1,000,000 years, nothing recognizable would be left on the surface. And in 100 million, every last remnant of our world would be gone, ground into mineral dust, drawn into magma, reborn as something else. Now, imagine that same process happening not once, but over and over for billions of years. Civilizations could have risen and vanished countless times, each erased so completely that even the memory of them became impossible. We wouldn't know. We couldn't. We look at Earth's ancient stones and see silence. But maybe that silence is an emptiness. Maybe it's amnesia. Some scientists have actually tried to calculate how much evidence of a technological civilization might survive deep time. The answer is almost none. Artifacts decay, metals corrode. Even nuclear waste, our most durable marker, would break down in a few million years. The only clues that could persist might not be objects at all, but patterns. Strange chemical traces in the rock, subtle shifts in atmospheric composition, unnatural isotopes. A civilization's entire existence might be reduced to a single microscopic layer in the geological record. A line of carbon here, a trace of plastic molecules there, a whisper embedded in stone. If you were an alien archaeologist visiting Earth 1 billion years from now, you might look at that layer and wonder what it meant. Was it volcanic, natural, or something else? The deeper you look, the more the difference begins to blur. There's another way to see it. Maybe civilizations aren't exceptions in nature. Maybe they're inevitable. Maybe the Earth is like a breathing organism that occasionally dreams. Each dream takes the shape of a civilization, alive for a while, creative, restless, brilliant. And then the dream fades and the world sleeps again. If that's true, then we're not pioneers. We're participants in a cycle that's been repeating for billions of years. Each time the Earth becomes stable enough, life takes the opportunity to reach upward. Each time, intelligence finds a way. And each time, time itself pulls the curtain closed again. It's strange comfort in a way, to think that intelligence might not be rare at all, but a natural phase of planetary life. That civilizations come and go like seasons, each adding a new verse to a story the Earth keeps telling itself. Maybe that's why we feel so drawn to the past, to ruins, fossils, and forgotten things. Some part of us remembers, not consciously but deeply, the way the ocean remembers the shape of the shore. We've always been obsessed with the idea of lost worlds. Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, the names change, but the longing stays the same. Across every culture, there are stories of ancient peoples, great floods, fires, and endings. Maybe those myths aren't warnings. Maybe they're memories, distorted through time, but rooted in truth. After all, what we call mythology might just be history, seen through the fog of geological time. The Sumerians spoke of eras before humanity. The Mayans wrote of worlds that came and went before this one. Even our oldest legends, those whispered from firesides before writing existed, share a strange consistency. A fall, a flood, a forgetting. It's as if every generation of life on this planet has carried an echo of those who came before. Scientists might say that such ideas are romantic, not rational. But science itself begins with imagination, the ability to picture something unseen. So, what if we take that imaginative step seriously? What if there was another civilization before us? One wiped so cleanly from history that all we have left are shadows in rock or myths in story. Would we even recognize their traces? Would we call their artifacts fossils or minerals or strange geological anomalies? Could something we've already labeled natural actually be the remains of something once built, once alive? We can't answer those questions yet. But asking them changes how we see ourselves, because if civilization can come and go more than once, then humanity is not a miracle. It's a pattern, and patterns are meant to repeat. So tonight, as we continue through this story, try to imagine time not as a line, but as a spiral, looping endlessly through creation and forgetting. Each turn of that spiral brings something new, but echoes what came before. And somewhere in those echoes, hidden in stone, buried beneath oceans, or perhaps scattered in the dust of another planet, might be the quiet proof that we were never truly first. The Earth has simply lived too long, dreamed too many dreams, and forgotten too much for us to know. And maybe that's all right, because sometimes mystery is its own kind of memory, the part of the story the world keeps for itself. When you look up at the night sky, there's one world that always seems to look back, a small red dot glowing faintly among the stars. Mars. It's strange how familiar it feels, isn't it? Out of all the planets, Mars is the one that feels closest to us, not in distance, but in spirit. It's the world that has always seemed almost human, not as distant as the gas giants, not as hostile as the sun's other children, just close enough that we can imagine walking there, touching its dust, breathing its thin, rusted air. But long before Mars became a symbol of longing and science fiction, it may have been something else entirely, not a destination, not a mystery, but a memory. Billions of years ago, long before humans, long before Earth's continents had names, Mars may have looked surprisingly familiar. It had oceans, rivers, rain, and clouds. Its air was thicker then, soft enough to hold warmth. The planet's tilt gave it seasons, its rotation made it rhythmic, and its sunlight, though fainter, was enough to keep it alive. NASA's orbiters and rovers have found the traces of that ancient world written across its surface. Valleys carved by flowing water, deltas that once fed into lakes, and minerals that could only have formed in the presence of heat and moisture. Even the craters tell a story of time, how, once, long ago, Mars had the right ingredients for life. It wasn't the cold desert we see today. It was blue, alive, and patient. So if Earth and Mars were siblings, born from the same cosmic dust, then Mars was the older one, the first to cool, the first to host liquid water, the first to offer a home for life. In a way, it was our planet's red mirror, a reflection of what we were and what we might become. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing there. The gravity is lighter. You'd feel it in your steps, a small weight lifted from your bones. The horizon stretches farther, and the sunlight glows weakly through a salmon-colored haze. The ground beneath your feet is fine and dry, like powdered clay. Around you, mountains rise higher than any on Earth, Olympus Mons, a volcano so vast it could swallow Mount Everest 3 times over. But the world isn't dead yet. You hear the hiss of wind over ancient dunes, the drip of meltwater sliding down rock in the Martian spring. There are lakes, clouds, maybe even forests of strange low vegetation whispering in the breeze. And somewhere, perhaps deep in a canyon or by a warm crater lake, something stirs. Not intelligent, not yet, but curious. Life, simple and persistent, begins to take hold. Over millions of years, that life could evolve. It could grow more complex, more daring. Mars had everything it needed: stability, time, and energy. If evolution is a universal rule, then there's no reason it couldn't have happened there too. And if life had enough time to thrive, even for a moment, who's to say it didn't reach toward consciousness? That's the idea that lingers quietly in the background of every photograph we've taken of Mars. The possibility that we're not looking at a future home, but an ancient one. Think about it. Earth's surface is constantly reshaped by plate tectonics, oceans, and weather. But Mars? It's still. Its crust is quiet. That means its surface holds memory, a geological archive stretching billions of years into the past. If a civilization had once existed there, the scars of it might still remain, buried under sand or hidden within canyons. And yet, when our rovers roll across those plains, all they find is silence. No cities, no monuments, just stone, wind, and dust. But maybe that's exactly what time does. It perfects its erasures. Still, there are hints, small, fragile, easy to dismiss. Magnetic patterns locked into the rock suggest Mars once had a protective field, strong enough to hold an atmosphere for hundreds of millions of years. Certain minerals hint at long-lasting oceans, deep, stable, full of the chemical complexity that life needs to flourish. And then there's methane, faint traces detected in the modern atmosphere, appearing and disappearing with the seasons. Methane is strange. It shouldn't be there, not in a dead world. It could come from geological processes, or from something more delicate, more biological, hiding deep beneath the surface. Even the shapes of the land whisper possibilities. River deltas shaped like fingers, ridges that look almost engineered, craters that seem too geometric to be purely random. The mind plays tricks, yes, but sometimes the imagination notices patterns before reason dares to name them. What if Mars didn't just host microbes? What if it hosted something capable of dreaming? Of course, mainstream science doesn't make that leap. It stops where evidence ends. But imagination, the quiet partner of science, keeps walking. Imagine a civilization that rose from the red dust, lived under twin moons, and learned to see the stars as we do. Imagine it building, learning, and reaching, until one day it faced a question we might one day face ourselves. How do you survive when your world begins to fade? Because Mars did fade. Its magnetic field weakened. The solar wind began to strip away its atmosphere. The rivers dried, the oceans evaporated, the air thinned and froze. Maybe that civilization saw it coming. Maybe they tried to move underground, or to other planets, or to the stars. Or maybe they didn't survive at all. All we know is that when the dust settled, the world that remained was silent. And yet, Mars still speaks, not through sound, but through memory. Every rock we study, every crater we photograph, every pattern of ancient sediment is a word in a story older than humanity. The story of a planet that once had everything we have now: warmth, water, chemistry, and time, and then lost it all. When we explore Mars, we're not just searching for alien life. We're looking for reflection, a glimpse of what intelligence looks like when it's given billions of years and then taken away. That's why Mars haunts us. It's not just another planet, it's the ghost of possibility. So, as we continue this journey tonight, keep this thought close. Maybe Mars was not our next home, but our first one. Maybe we're not its conquerors, but its descendants. And maybe, when we look up at that red glow in the night sky, what we're really seeing is the faint memory of ourselves. An echo of an ancient civilization lost to time that still calls to us from across the dark. Because sometimes the past doesn't die. It just moves to another world, waiting to be remembered. If life has a voice, it speaks through water. Every living thing we know, every cell, every forest, every person, begins in it, depends on it, and eventually returns to it. Water is the first ingredient of memory, the element that connects one world to another. Here on Earth, water writes the story of civilization. The great rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yellow, shape not just the land, but the rhythm of human life itself. People built near rivers not out of coincidence, but because the water whispered a promise: stay here and you will survive. But if water is the handwriting of civilization, then Mars once wrote in long, flowing cursive. When spacecraft began mapping Mars in the late 20th century, scientists expected to see a barren world, craters and dust, nothing more. Instead, they found valleys that twisted like ancient riverbeds, deltas that could only have formed from long-standing lakes, and the ghostly outlines of coastlines that hinted at entire seas. The first time humanity saw those images, it was like catching a glimpse of our own reflection. billions of years out of phase. There were channels hundreds of kilometers long, branching networks that converged into basins, and ripple patterns frozen in stone, the signatures of moving water. Even the minerals on Mars, when examined closely, told the same story. Hematite, clay, carbonates, all minerals that can only form in the presence of water over long periods of time. The message was clear. Once, Mars had rivers that flowed for ages. Once, it rained. Once, the planet was alive with motion. It's strange to think of it now, that beneath all that dust, Mars once glistened. Imagine standing near one of those rivers 3.5 billion years ago. The air is thin but breathable. The sky has a pale amber hue, painted with drifting clouds. At your feet, water winds through smooth stones, carrying with it the sound of life beginning. Tiny microbes swim in the current, clinging to mineral grains, harvesting sunlight and warmth. On the shore, the first mats of simple plant-like life spread outward, dark and slick, creating the oxygen that will one day fade away. The water glints in the soft red light, the color of rust, of iron, of memory. Even now, in that imagined moment, you can almost hear civilization breathing, not as we know it, but as something embryonic, something waiting to happen. Because where water flows, complexity follows. And complexity, given enough time, learns to think. It's easy to forget that water isn't just a substance, it's an environment. It shapes gravity, chemistry, and even thought. On Earth, it's what allowed life to cluster together, to cooperate, to build structure from chaos. Life learned to cling, then to grow, then to move. Over millions of years, that movement became intention. If Mars followed a similar path, its rivers might have been the first teachers of intelligence. They connected valleys and plains the way trade routes would one day connect cities. They created patterns of abundance and scarcity, forcing competition, adaptation, and eventually, awareness. Maybe civilization doesn't begin with tools or fire. Maybe it begins with a current, a small stream that teaches life to gather, to remember, to move together. The connection between water and consciousness is so ancient it's almost invisible. On Earth, the earliest evidence of human cooperation, cave dwellings, tools, art, always appears near water. Even language itself carries traces of this dependence. Words like flow, current, source, well, spring, all of them carry both physical and spiritual meaning. Civilization, it seems, isn't built on land, it's built on shorelines. So, when we see those Martian riverbeds, frozen and dry, we're not just seeing evidence of geology, we're seeing the remnants of potential, of a pattern that might have played out somewhere else, long before we appeared. Perhaps there were beings, however simple, who gathered near those rivers, who watched the same skies and wondered about the same stars. Perhaps the first sparks of thought flickered beneath Martian rain. And then, perhaps, just as suddenly as it began, the water disappeared. The loss of water is a slow kind of death. It doesn't announce itself with explosions or fire. It simply leaves, drop by drop. The air thins, the rivers shrink, the lakes turn to salt and dust. Civilization, if it existed, would have watched the world dry around it, helpless to stop it. That's one of the most haunting things about Mars, how familiar its tragedy feels. When we look at those dry deltas, it's hard not to see the reflection of our own rivers, shrinking, warming, polluted. The same patterns of change, playing out again, billions of years apart. It's almost as if Mars is a warning, written in rust. This is what happens when the balance breaks. But maybe there's something gentler in that reflection too. Because for all its silence, Mars still carries the memory of water. In the minerals, in the ice trapped below the surface, in the faint seasonal flows seen from orbit. Even in death, the planet remembers what it was, and that memory is contagious. When we study Mars, we're not just searching for its past. We're remembering our own beginnings, the way water shaped our ancestors, guided our migrations, and gave rise to our first settlements. The Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yangtze. These weren't just rivers, they were teachers. They taught us how to gather, how to farm, how to plan for the future. They were the first civilizations before civilization. And in that way, they echo Mars's ancient waterways. maybe every intelligent world has its rivers. Maybe every civilization begins by listening to the sound of water against stone. It's comforting, in a way, to think that the pattern repeats, that wherever conditions are right, water takes up the same quiet work, sculpting valleys, feeding oceans, and nurturing life toward awareness. The story of Mars, then, isn't just the story of a planet that failed. It's the story of a teacher that once succeeded, long enough to prove that the cosmos has more than one way to grow intelligence. If Earth and Mars were sisters, then Mars was the first to awaken, and Earth the one who remembered. Every world begins as a cradle, a place where chaos softens into balance, where heat cools just enough to invite water, where storms calm long enough for life to find its rhythm. Mars had that balance once. It cradled oceans, air, warmth, and time. It was steady, not perfect, but hospitable. It had everything it needed to nurture something extraordinary. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cradle began to break. The story of Mars's death isn't a story of catastrophe. It's a story of slow loss, a planet losing its pulse over billions of years. The first sign came from deep within. Mars was smaller than Earth, and smaller worlds cool faster. Inside, the molten core that once churned like a heart began to solidify. With that solidification came silence. Not the poetic kind, but the magnetic one. You see, a planet's magnetic field is more than just an invisible shield. It's a guardian. It deflects solar winds, keeps atmospheres from being stripped away, and protects the surface from the constant hiss of cosmic radiation. When Mars lost its magnetic field, it lost its protection. The solar wind, a steady stream of charged particles from the sun, began to graze the upper atmosphere. It was slow at first, like a whisper brushing across the air. But over millions of years, it stripped away the gases molecule by molecule, tearing at the fabric of the sky until there was almost nothing left. The pressure dropped, the temperature fell. The oceans began to evaporate into the thinning air, then froze, then vanished. And one day, perhaps without ceremony, the last raindrop on Mars fell. Imagine living through that kind of ending. Generations watching as the rivers retreat, as the air becomes too thin to breathe, as the familiar warmth of sunlight fades into a brittle chill. Imagine the way the wind would sound, sharper, hungrier, scouring the empty plains. If there were beings there, intelligent or not, they must have known. They must have seen their world changing, slower than a lifetime, but faster than eternity. At first, maybe they adapted, moved underground, built shelters, stored what water remained. But eventually, survival would have become a waiting game, not against disaster, but against inevitability. Every civilization eventually learns that progress can't outpace entropy forever. Today, when we look at Mars, what we're seeing is not just a planet. We're seeing the aftermath of imbalance. The atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, but too thin to trap heat. The average surface temperature hovers around minus 60 degrees Celsius. Radiation from the sun rains down unfiltered. The once blue world is now dusted in red, iron oxide, the chemical signature of rust. Even its colors are a memory of what was lost. There are still traces of the old world, if you know where to look. Frozen water beneath the poles, ancient riverbeds carved into the rock, minerals that tell the long-vanished seas. It's as if the planet kept souvenirs from its better days, relics of warmth. But the heart of the world is cold now. Its magnetic field is gone, its tectonic plates still. It no longer breathes or stirs. Mars didn't explode, it didn't burn, it simply faded. And maybe that's the saddest kind of ending, the one that arrives so gently, you don't notice it until it's over. When scientists model the loss of Mars's atmosphere, they can almost play it like a movie in reverse. You can watch the thick clouds thinning, the skies paling, the seas turning to vapor. It's a beautiful kind of tragedy, a planet unmaking itself in slow motion. Some theories suggest it took hundreds of millions of years for the transformation to complete, long enough for entire ecosystems to rise and fall, long enough for whatever life existed to watch its own extinction approach, inch by inch, until the air itself became memory. If there were cities, they're gone. If there were voices, they've long since turned to dust. But something remains, not proof, but presence. Because the more we study Mars, the more it feels like a mirror. You can see that reflection when you compare our worlds. Earth too has a magnetic field, for now. It hums deep below us, powered by a liquid core, invisible yet vital. It keeps our atmosphere close, our oceans liquid, our climate gentle enough to breathe. But even this balance is fragile. Even this warmth depends on systems that will one day slow. Mars may have once been Earth's elder sister, showing us both how to live and how to fall. When you look at the images of its desolation, it's hard not to see our own reflection. A world that thought it was eternal, unaware that its time as a cradle was limited. Because no cradle lasts forever. The connection between planetary death and civilization is more than symbolic. Every culture on Earth lives within its environment's limits. When those limits shift, so does everything else. Food, water, survival, hope. Mars reminds us that no amount of adaptation can last if the foundation itself is crumbling. It's not just a planetary story, it's a human one. As we change our own climate, warm our oceans, and thin our air, we echo that same ancient rhythm. Mars lost its sky molecule by molecule. We, perhaps, are losing our degree by degree. The difference is speed. Mars had time. We may not. But maybe that's why Mars is such an important teacher. It shows us not just what can be lost, but how quietly loss arrives. There are no explosions in its history, no single event that ended it all. Just a long drift downward, a slow cooling, a steady evaporation, a fading of possibility. The cradle didn't shatter, it simply emptied. And maybe, in that quiet decline, there's a kind of wisdom. The understanding that survival depends not on strength, but on balance. Mars reminds us that life isn't guaranteed, even when the conditions seem perfect. It's a delicate negotiation between chemistry and chance, between warmth and time. Lose either, and even the most promising cradle will one day be bare. So, when you look up at that small red light in the sky, don't think of it as a failed world. Think of it as an ancestor, a teacher, the first to hold the gift of life, and the first to show how easily it can slip away. Because if Mars was the first cradle, then Earth is the second. And perhaps somewhere far beyond us, another is waiting, blue or green or gold, preparing to take its turn in the long lineage of worlds that live and die in the arms of time. Every world begins as a cradle, a place where chaos softens into balance, where heat cools just enough to invite water, where storms calm long enough for life to find its rhythm. Mars had that balance once. It cradled oceans, air, warmth, and time. It was steady, not perfect, but hospitable. It had everything it needed to nurture something extraordinary. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cradle began to break. The story of Mars's death isn't a story of catastrophe. It's a story of slow loss, a planet losing its pulse over billions of years. The first sign came from deep within. Mars was smaller than Earth, and smaller worlds cool faster. Inside, the molten core that once churned like a heart began to solidify. With that solidification came silence. Not the poetic kind, but the magnetic one. You see, a planet's magnetic field is more than just an invisible shield. It's a guardian. It deflects solar winds, keeps atmospheres from being stripped away, and protects the surface from the constant hiss of cosmic radiation. When Mars lost its magnetic field, it lost its protection. The solar wind, a steady stream of charged particles from the sun, began to graze the upper atmosphere. It was slow at first, like a whisper brushing across the air. But over millions of years, it stripped away the gases molecule by molecule, tearing at the fabric of the sky until there was almost nothing left. The pressure dropped, the temperature fell. The oceans began to evaporate into the thinning air, then froze, then vanished. And one day, perhaps without ceremony, the last raindrop on Mars fell. Imagine living through that kind of ending. Generations watching as the rivers retreat, as the air becomes too thin to breathe, as the familiar warmth of sunlight fades into a brittle chill. Imagine the way the wind would sound, sharper, hungrier, scouring the empty plains. If there were beings there, intelligent or not, they must have known. They must have seen their world changing, slower than a lifetime, but faster than eternity. At first, maybe they adapted, moved underground, built shelters, stored what water remained. But eventually, survival would have become a waiting game, not against disaster, but against inevitability. Every civilization eventually learns that progress can't outpace entropy forever. Today, when we look at Mars, what we're seeing is not just a planet. We're seeing the aftermath of imbalance. The atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, but too thin to trap heat. The average surface temperature hovers around minus 60 degrees Celsius. Radiation from the sun rains down unfiltered. The once blue world is now dusted in red, iron oxide, the chemical signature of rust. Even its colors are a memory of what was lost. There are still traces of the old world, if you know where to look. Frozen water beneath the poles, ancient riverbeds carved into the rock, minerals that tell the long-vanished seas. It's as if the planet kept souvenirs from its better days, relics of warmth. But the heart of the world is cold now. Its magnetic field is gone, its tectonic plates still. It no longer breathes or stirs. Mars didn't explode, it didn't burn, it simply faded. And maybe that's the saddest kind of ending, the one that arrives so gently, you don't notice it until it's over. When scientists model the loss of Mars's atmosphere, they can almost play it like a movie in reverse. You can watch the thick clouds thinning, the skies paling, the seas turning to vapor. It's a beautiful kind of tragedy, a planet unmaking itself in slow motion. Some theories suggest it took hundreds of millions of years for the transformation to complete, long enough for entire ecosystems to rise and fall, long enough for whatever life existed to watch its own extinction approach, inch by inch, until the air itself became memory. If there were cities, they're gone. If there were voices, they've long since turned to dust. But something remains, not proof, but presence. Because the more we study Mars, the more it feels like a mirror. You can see that reflection when you compare our worlds. Earth too has a magnetic field, for now. It hums deep below us, powered by a liquid core, invisible yet vital. It keeps our atmosphere close, our oceans liquid, our climate gentle enough to breathe. But even this balance is fragile. Even this warmth depends on systems that will one day slow. Mars may have once been Earth's elder sister, showing us both how to live and how to fall. When you look at the images of its desolation, it's hard not to see our own reflection. A world that thought it was eternal, unaware that its time as a cradle was limited. Because no cradle lasts forever. The connection between planetary death and civilization is more than symbolic. Every culture on Earth lives within its environment's limits. When those limits shift, so does everything else. Food, water, survival, hope. Mars reminds us that no amount of adaptation can last if the foundation itself is crumbling. It's not just a planetary story, it's a human one. As we change our own climate, warm our oceans, and thin our air, we echo that same ancient rhythm. Mars lost its sky molecule by molecule. We, perhaps, are losing our degree by degree. The difference is speed. Mars had time, we may not. But maybe that's why Mars is such an important teacher. It shows us not just what can be lost, but how quietly loss arrives. There are no explosions in its history, no single event that ended it all. Just a long drift downward, a slow cooling, a steady evaporation, a fading of possibility. The cradle didn't shatter, it simply emptied. And maybe, in that quiet decline, there's a kind of wisdom. The understanding that survival depends not on strength, but on balance. Mars reminds us that life isn't guaranteed, even when the conditions seem perfect. It's a delicate negotiation between chemistry and chance, between warmth and time. Lose either, and even the most promising cradle will one day be bare. So, when you look up at that small red light in the sky, don't think of it as a failed world. Think of it as an ancestor, a teacher, the first to hold the gift of life, and the first to show how easily it can slip away. Because if Mars was the first cradle, then Earth is the second. And perhaps somewhere far beyond us, another is waiting, blue or green or gold, preparing to take its turn in the long lineage of worlds that live and die in the arms of time. There's a certain romance to the idea of connection, that nothing in the universe truly stands alone. Planets form in families, stars drift in clusters, galaxies spin in pairs. Even the emptiest spaces are threaded with invisible bonds of gravity and dust. So perhaps it should not surprise us to imagine that life too might travel these cosmic threads, drifting from one world to another, carried by chance, by impact, by time. The theory is called panspermia, and it begins with a simple question. What if life didn't start here? 4 billion years ago, our solar system was a violent place. Asteroids collided with planets. Comets rained down like endless meteors, and the young sun burned hotter than it does today. Every impact sent shockwaves through space, hurling fragments of rock into the dark. Some of those fragments came from Mars. We know because we found them. Meteorites that landed on Earth, unmistakably Martian in origin. They carry the chemical fingerprints of Mars's atmosphere, sealed inside glassy veins of ancient rock. And in those rocks, scientists have found something even stranger. Microscopic structures, etched into the stone, that resemble fossils, not proof of life, but suggestion. As if the memory of biology had somehow traveled across the void. If life ever began on Mars, those rocks could have been its messengers. Picture it. A massive asteroid strikes Mars, sending up a plume of molten debris. Some pieces are flung so hard they escape the planet's gravity, sailing out into the cold. For thousands, maybe millions of years, they drift through space, frozen, silent, shielded from radiation by their own stone. Then, one by one, they fall toward Earth. They burn through our young atmosphere, crash into the oceans, the continents, the soft mud of a planet still learning how to live. And inside them, perhaps, something endures. A microbe, dormant but intact. A seed waiting for soil. It's not as impossible as it sounds. Certain bacteria on Earth can survive extremes we once thought unimaginable. Radiation, freezing, even the vacuum of space. Experiments on the International Space Station have shown that life can endure years of exposure to the void, waking again once it returns to warmth and water. So, maybe in those early days, life hopped between worlds like pollen carried by the wind. If that's true, then Earth is not life's birthplace. It's its garden, and Mars, perhaps, was the first seed. It's an idea both humbling and comforting, because it means that life, at its core, is not fragile, it's relentless. It doesn't care about distance or gravity or even death. It finds a way to move forward, to cross the gulfs that separate one home from another. We call it survival, but maybe it's something deeper. Persistence as a form of memory. Imagine that the first stirrings of Martian life, cells dividing in warm ponds, clinging to volcanic cliffs, didn't vanish when their world grew cold. They simply traveled, they adapted, they changed their sky and their gravity, but not their essence. In a way, we might be Mars remembering itself. There's poetry in that thought, isn't there? That every breath we take could be a continuation of a much older story. A story written first in red dust, and then in blue water. The atoms in our bodies, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our cells, they were forged in the hearts of stars. But perhaps the pattern of life, the spark of replication itself, began closer to home, just across the gulf of space, on our quiet, forgotten neighbor. And maybe, just maybe, that spark didn't stop with us. When meteorites strike Earth today, some of that debris escapes into space once again, carrying fragments of our world outward. Tiny pieces of us, microbes, spores, molecules, drifting beyond our atmosphere. Someday those fragments might land on another world, starting the cycle anew. The seed that began on Mars might already be blooming elsewhere. Scientists studying Mars call this concept lithopanspermia, literally life through stone. It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? A reminder that even the hardest, coldest things can be vessels of connection. Stone, after all, is just time made solid, and life, it seems, knows how to hitch a ride on time itself. Even if only a single microbe made that journey, that would be enough. Evolution doesn't need much, just a beginning. From one tiny survivor, an entire planet can bloom. So when we ask whether life exists elsewhere, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not if life exists, but where the family has wandered, because the universe might not invent life anew every time. It might simply spread what already works. There's something almost spiritual about that, though it's built entirely on science. It suggests that existence itself is collaborative, that planets don't compete for life, they share it, that the cosmos is not a cold expanse of isolation, but a network of silent exchanges. Mars gives to Earth. Earth one day gives to something else. And the story continues. A lineage of worlds, each nurturing what the last began. In that sense, panspermia isn't just biology, it's compassion written in physics. And if that's true, if we are indeed the descendants of Martian life, then we are not aliens to the universe. We are its children, born of its persistence, shaped by its patience. Maybe that's why the thought of Mars feels so intimate. When we gaze at it, we don't feel the awe of strangers. We feel recognition, a faint homesickness for a place we've never lived but might have once belonged to. The same way you might feel something stir inside you when you visit the house you grew up in. Familiar but distant, empty but alive with memory. That's what Mars is to us. The house we left behind, still standing in the cold, waiting for its children to come home. So, when our rovers roll across its plains, digging into its dust and listening to its silence, maybe they're not explorers at all. Maybe they're archaeologists or pilgrims, returning to the cradle that once held them. Every footprint we've left on that red soil isn't discovery, it's reunion. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful truth of all, that in a universe so vast and indifferent, life still finds a way to remain connected, that nothing living is ever truly alone. Even between worlds, the seed remembers where it came from. Every color tells a story. Blue speaks of calm, green of life, gold of sunlight. But red? Red has always meant something deeper. On Earth, red is the color of blood, of warmth, of the heart. It's the pulse of life and the shadow of danger. But in the night sky, there's another red, colder, steadier, patient. For as long as humans have looked upward, Mars has been there, glowing like an ember that never dies. We called it the god of war, the harbinger of change, the restless wanderer among the stars. But maybe those myths were never about war at all. Maybe they were about memory. There's something haunting about the fact that Mars is red because it's rusted, that the entire planet is covered in iron oxide, the residue of a world that once had water, oxygen, and the chemistry of life. Every grain of dust there is a fossil of oxidation, the slow reaction between water and metal. Mars rusted because it breathed, and that red hue we see from Earth, that soft, persistent glow, is the color of remembrance. When we look at it now, we're not seeing a lifeless planet. We're seeing the ashes of its former vitality, scattered across the surface like pigment on a cosmic canvas. In a way, Mars painted its own obituary, and yet, somehow, that red reached us, not just in light, but in story. Every ancient culture that tracked the heavens knew Mars. To the Babylonians, it was Nergal, the star of fire and pestilence. To the Greeks, Ares, fierce and unpredictable. To the Romans, Mars, a god of war but also of fertility, the dual nature of destruction and creation. The Egyptians called it Horus the Red, an eye that watched from the desert sky. The Hindus saw Mangala, the planet of energy, courage, and fate. Different names, different stories, yet all colored the same shade of red. It's curious, isn't it? That no matter the distance or culture, Mars has always carried an aura of familiarity, as though the memory of its redness was already inside us. Sometimes, I wonder if myths remember what we've forgotten. If we really did come from Mars, if the seeds of life began there and drifted here, then perhaps the stories we tell are just the echoes of that ancestral connection, the gods descending from the heavens, the lost lands swallowed by water or fire, the crimson skies of apocalypse and rebirth. Maybe those aren't just metaphors. Maybe they're half-remembered history, the dreams of cells that still remember the red world they once called home. Think about it. Our blood is red because of iron. Mars's dust is red for the same reason. The same element flows in our veins and across its plains. The same chemistry that once painted its deserts now colors our hearts. Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe that's inheritance. Across time, that inheritance might have seeped into our oldest stories, not as knowledge, but as intuition. When early humans looked up and saw that red star wandering against the dark, Perhaps something ancient stirred within them, a recognition without reason, an echo without a name. They saw Mars not as a stranger, but as a mirror, a world both distant and deeply familiar. And because language had not yet caught up with memory, they turned that feeling into myth. They gave it the face of a god, the name of a warrior, the meaning of home. You can trace that thread through history like a recurring dream. The Mayans linked Mars to fire and transformation. The Chinese called it the Ying Huo, the fire star, and believed its movements foretold change. In Japan, the red planet was associated with courage and ancestors. Even in medieval Europe, Mars ruled over iron, blood, and battle, not because people feared it, but because they felt it. Some myths even speak of beings who came from the sky, bringing knowledge, teaching agriculture, architecture, or music. We call them gods now. But if the memory of Mars is buried in our biology, then perhaps those stories were never about divine visitors, just about remembering where we came from. The sky has always been our oldest library, and Mars might be one of its oldest pages. There's a strange comfort in that idea, that mythology and geology might be telling the same story in different languages. The rocks on Mars whisper about rivers that once flowed, seas that once shimmered. The myths on Earth speak of floods, lost worlds, and red skies. Two records of the same event, one written in dust, the other in dreams. Even our word for martial, from Mars, has dual meanings. Warlike, yes, but also passionate, driven, vital. The planet that burned with life before it froze became our symbol for energy itself. So perhaps we didn't invent these stories. Perhaps we inherited them, passed down not through words, but through atoms. When we study Mars today, scraping at its surface, analyzing its soil, tracing its isotopes, we're not just doing science, we're translating myth. Every discovery there adds another sentence to a very old story, one that began long before humanity, when planets still shared their warmth and life was young and adventurous. And every time we find a new clue, a dried riverbed, a hint of methane, an unexpected mineral, it's like turning a page and finding something that feels oddly familiar, because deep down, we already know how this story ends. We've been telling it for thousands of years. We just didn't realize we were the ones in it. So maybe the legends aren't wrong. Maybe Mars really was a place of fire, of passion, of beginnings and endings. Not because of gods or magic, but because of chemistry and time, because of what happens when a world lives and then forgets. And maybe that's what mythology truly is. The Earth remembering what the cosmos has already written in stone. The next time you see Mars rise in the evening sky, take a moment to look at its color, not as a light, but as a message. That red is the color of life's persistence, of history's patience, of the quiet fact that even when a world dies, its story doesn't. It lingers, scattered across space, waiting for someone to remember. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was us. Before there were telescopes, before the names and numbers and measurements, there was only the act of looking up. Every civilization begins that way, with eyes turned to the sky. If there was ever life on Mars, intelligent enough to wonder, then there must have been a night when one of them paused and looked upward, just as we do, and saw a sky unlike any other. Let's imagine that sky together. The day on Mars begins softly, with a pale amber glow bleeding across the horizon. The air is thin, sunlight filters through it like dust through glass, scattering in shades of gold and rose. The sun itself is smaller here, only 2/3 the size it appears from Earth. Its light weak but sharp, like the gleam of polished copper. As the day rises, shadows stretch long and strange. The colors never reach the blue of Earth. They stay muted, faded, as though the world is perpetually caught between sunset and memory. At noon, the sky becomes a faint yellow-gray, a quiet haze above the red desert below. The air tastes of minerals and frost. And when the day ends, the light falls differently, more patient, more gradual. The sun sinks, and the sky deepens into rust and violet. And then, slowly, 2 moons wake. The first is Phobos, the larger of the 2. It rises quickly, too quickly, crossing the sky in just 4 hours. It's so close that it looks enormous, a lopsided stone carving drifting overhead. You can see its shadows move. You can see its craters with the naked eye. Sometimes during the day, it's visible even against the sunlight, like a ghost refusing to fade. The second moon, Deimos, comes later, smaller and slower. It's faint, delicate, a speck of quiet light that seems to hesitate before appearing. Where Phobos races, Deimos drifts, a yin and yang of motion, a rhythm of the heavens that never repeats the same way twice. Imagine standing beneath that double dance every night, watching those moons rise and fall, like two thoughts that can't quite agree on a dream. Would you not begin to wonder what they meant? Every world that looks upward creates stories to explain the sky. Here on Earth, we've done it for millennia. We turn stars into hunters and queens, gods and lovers. But on Mars, the sky would have written a different mythology, faster, stranger, more intimate. A being watching Phobos move across the night would see it rise in the west and set in the east, the opposite of what we know. It would streak overhead in a hurry, never staying still. Deimos, on the other hand, would seem almost faithful, always in the same place, drifting quietly above the horizon. You could almost imagine an entire culture built around those two moons, one representing haste and passion, the other patience and endurance, the god of movement and the god of waiting, the restless and the calm, the twin spirits of time. Even the stars would tell a different story there. With a thinner atmosphere, the Martian night would be brutally clear, sharper than any sky we've ever seen. The stars would burn like pinpricks of ice, their light unfiltered, almost painful in its purity. The constellations would be the same as ours, yet entirely foreign. The familiar shapes of Orion, Cassiopeia, and the Pleiades would appear brighter, harder, closer, as though the universe itself were leaning in. And somewhere among them, a faint blue light would gleam. Earth. To eyes on Mars, our planet would shine like a morning star, waxing and waning just as Venus does in our own sky. Imagine what that might mean to those who watched it. A tiny blue world, beautiful, distant, and alive. Would they have dreamed of us the way we now dream of them? The atmosphere on Mars creates another spectacle, something Earth never sees. Dust storms that stretch for thousands of miles, wrapping the planet in swirling veils of copper and gold. During these storms, the light changes completely. The sun becomes a dim ember behind the haze. The world glows from within, as though lit by its own fading fire. If you stood there, the sound would be faint, a whispering hiss of particles brushing against stone. The sky would pulse with light and shadow, and the moons would vanish into the storm. For days there would be no stars, no sky, only the slow shimmer of dust in eternal twilight. Perhaps they had words for that kind of night, a word for when the heavens disappeared and the world became one endless room of red air. All of this, the color, the movement, the rhythm, would shape how any being on Mars thought, dreamed, and remembered. Their days were shorter, 24 hours and 37 minutes, so their clocks would feel almost like ours, but slightly off, enough to notice. Their years were twice as long, their seasons stretched and strange. Winters would linger, summers would hesitate, and the planet itself would teach patience. If they built calendars, they would count in pairs, 2 moons, 2 cycles, 2 skies. Their art might show constant motion, spirals, twin paths crossing. Their languages might have words for colors we cannot name, hues of red we've never seen, tones of dusk that only Mars could teach. Maybe, in their songs, they spoke not of forever, but of returning, of orbits and echoes and dust that never truly settles. There's something deeply human about imagining what they might have seen, because in doing so, we begin to understand that perception is shaped by place. Our sky, with its one moon and blue days, has made us dream in certain ways, of singularity, of clarity, of the contrast between day and night. But a Martian mind would dream differently. Their world was a gradient, not a division. Their nights were filled with motion, their days with dust. They would have seen beauty not in permanence, but in repetition. The same moons, the same storms, the same patterns of light playing endlessly across the same red ground. To them, eternity might not mean endless time, but the return of what has been. And perhaps when we finally return there, when humans walk under that sky again, we'll feel it too. that strange sense of familiarity, of déjà vu stretched across epochs. We'll stand beneath those twin moons, watching them chase each other through the thin air, and we'll know. We've seen this before, in some other form, in some other life. Not because we remember Mars, but because Mars remembers us. The light that leaves Earth tonight will reach it in just a few minutes. It will touch the dust, the stones, the old riverbeds. It will mix with the faint glow of Phobos and Deimos, our world's reflection meeting its own red memory. And for that brief instant, the two skies, theirs and ours, will share a single light again. Everything forgets, given enough time, even stone, even stars. Forgetting isn't just a human act, it's a universal law. And if you want to understand how civilizations vanish, you don't start with history, you start with geology. On Earth, forgetting happens quickly. Mountains erode, rivers carve, continents drift. Forests rise and burn and rise again. Even the air changes. Nothing here holds still long enough to remember for long. A city can fall and vanish in a few thousand years, swallowed by jungle, buried under silt, rewritten by wind and rain. The pyramids which feel eternal to us have already lost their faces to sand and sun. Our tallest towers, if left untended, would crumble within centuries, dissolve completely within millennia. Give the Earth a few million years, and it will forget everything we've built. The crust is a recycler, a slow, relentless eraser. What isn't buried is consumed, and what's buried is melted down, pushed deep into the mantle, reborn as something else. Even our bones, even our fossils are temporary. Time doesn't destroy them with anger. It simply replaces them, molecule by molecule, until all that remains is a shape made of stone pretending to be memory. Mars is different. Mars forgets slowly. It has no tectonic plates to shuffle its past, no rain to wash it away, no oceans to dissolve the ruins of time. Its surface is a library of moments that never turned a page. Every crater, every dune, every fossil ripple in the rock. They've been there for billions of years. And yet, paradoxically, that makes its forgetting more complete. Because while nothing moves, nothing grows either. Its memory is sealed, silent, and unreachable. Imagine finding a diary that's perfectly preserved, but written in a language no one can read. That's Mars. All the clues may still be there, frozen beneath the dust, but time has buried the context, the meaning, the living pulse that once animated it. Mars doesn't erase, it entombs. It holds everything in place, and by doing so, it forgets how to feel. Here on Earth, forgetting feels alive. Erosion is a kind of breathing. The wind takes what it can, the sea reclaims the shore, the forests rebuild over the ruins. Each act of loss creates something new. Our forgetting feeds the future. But on Mars, forgetting is sterile. It's not transformation, it's pause. The planet is a museum where the lights went out. Every artifact remains where it was left. But without sound, without touch, without life, their stories are gone. If there were once cities there, their stones might still exist, but so buried, so altered by radiation and dust, that they've lost all resemblance to intention. If there were bones, they would have turned to mineral long ago, then shattered under the weight of 1,000 winters. And if there were words, carved, painted, etched, they've been erased one storm at a time. Mars has had 4 billion years of sandpaper to work with. We like to believe that traces of life are eternal. But the truth is, the universe has no sentimentality. It keeps nothing forever. Our fossils, our data, our monuments, they all live on borrowed time. Even light, which seems eternal, stretches and fades as it travels. Memory itself obeys entropy. And yet, that doesn't make it meaningless. In fact, it makes it sacred. Because every act of remembrance, every effort to preserve or rediscover, becomes a small rebellion against the physics of forgetting. If a Martian civilization once existed, we might never find it, not because it wasn't there, but because time is too patient. Erosion doesn't need intent. It doesn't rush. 1 billion years is enough to erase anything that isn't part of the bedrock itself, even the evidence of a technological species. Its metals, its plastics, its architecture would break down, oxidize, and vanish. Imagine, for a moment, if humanity disappeared today. In 1,000 years, our cities would be forests of rust and vine. In 10,000, the glass would crumble, the metal would rot. In 1,000,000, tectonics and ice would have hidden everything beneath sediment and sea. And in 100 million years, Earth would remember us only as a faint chemical signature, a strange layer in the rock, a brief spike in carbon, a whisper in the fossil record. That's all a civilization is to a planet, a momentary pattern like frost on glass. Beautiful, intricate, but gone with the next warmth. On Mars, there's a concept scientists call geologic stasis, a kind of planetary sleep. It means the surface has changed so little over time that it might still carry the scars of its first centuries. That's why Mars is so mesmerizing. It's not just a dead world, it's a preserved one. But that preservation is deceptive. It doesn't tell us what was lost. A sand dune looks the same, whether it's covering a ruin or an empty field. And maybe that's the cruelest trick of cosmic forgetting. You can't tell the difference between absence and erasure. There's a strange comfort in realizing that forgetting is universal, because it means that memory, the act of holding on, is not a given. It's a choice. When we send our probes and rovers to Mars, when we photograph its dust and measure its soil, we're not just studying another planet. We're reminding the universe that it's still being watched, still being remembered. Each image is a kind of resistance, a refusal to let the cosmos slip entirely into silence. If we are descendants of a Martian lineage, then maybe our curiosity is their final legacy, the need to explore, to record, to remember. Perhaps that instinct didn't start here. Perhaps it survived the extinction of its first home and took root in ours. And that would mean that even in forgetting, Mars succeeded, because it didn't preserve structures or artifacts. It preserved the will to look back. Forgetting isn't failure. It's the space that makes remembering possible. And maybe that's what the cosmos is really doing, balancing between the two, letting each world forget just enough for the next one to rediscover. In that way, memory is never lost. It's just redistributed, scattered like dust, waiting for another civilization, another time, to find it again. So, the next time you see Mars glowing faintly in the sky, remember, you're not looking at a planet that forgot. You're looking at one that's still waiting to be remembered. And maybe, in the slow arithmetic of the universe, that's what immortality really is. Not the absence of forgetting, but the endless cycle of rediscovery. There's a strange moment that happens sometimes when you look at Mars, when you realize you're not really looking outward, but inward. It's as if the planet, silent and distant, is holding up a mirror, and what you see reflected there isn't just red dust and stone. It's the possible future of Earth. Mars wasn't always cold and dead. It was once blue, alive, breathing. It had rivers and clouds and the hum of chemical life in its air. It had balance, the same delicate equilibrium that sustains us now. Then, slowly, it lost it. The warmth faded, the sky thinned, the water vanished, and everything that depended on that balance, every spark of complexity, faded with it. That's the story we tell about Mars. But if you listen carefully, it's not just a story about another world. It's a parable, a reflection written across time. Because here, on our vibrant Earth, the same balance hums beneath everything. Fragile, invisible, easily broken. And every day, without realizing it, we test it. When we talk about climate change, it sounds like a human problem. Floods, heat waves, droughts. But in the quiet language of the universe, it's something older, deeper. It's the same pattern that took Mars apart, beginning to echo here. The parallels are eerie. Mars lost its magnetic field. We are weakening ours. Mars's atmosphere thinned as gases escaped into space. Ours grows unstable from the gases we add to it. Mars's oceans evaporated into the sky and froze at the poles. Our ice melts and raises the seas. Different causes, same outcome. A slow unwinding, a loss of equilibrium. If Mars is a mirror, it's not showing us the past. It's showing us the consequence. It's easy to forget how dependent we are on balance. A shift of a few degrees, a rise of a few meters, a loss of a few species, and the fabric that holds civilization together begins to fray. Mars didn't need a catastrophe to end its story. It just needed enough small changes, over enough time, to make living impossible. We like to imagine extinction as dramatic, asteroids, explosions, apocalypses, but the truth is quieter. Worlds don't die in fire, they fade into silence. Mars whispers the truth to us every night. And maybe that's why it haunts us, because deep down, we recognize the sound. If you could place the two planets side by side, Earth and Mars, the contrast would be heartbreaking. One blue, one red. One wrapped in clouds, one wrapped in dust. One filled with sound, the other with silence. But look closer, and the differences blur. Mars still has its ice, buried deep. Earth still carries the memory of its deserts. Both are carved by wind, scarred by impact, watched over by the same sun. They are siblings, and siblings share more than we admit. Perhaps that's why Mars draws us so strongly. Not because it's foreign, but because it feels like déjà vu, the haunting sense of recognizing something you've never seen before. In its silence, we hear our potential ending. In its red deserts, we see the echo of our own. And in its lost rivers, we glimpse the fragility of our oceans. Maybe the reason we send rovers there, the reason we dream of colonizing it, isn't just curiosity, it's instinct. We're visiting our reflection, testing whether we can still learn from it before it's too late. We are, in a way, asking Mars for advice. If planets could speak, Mars might say, "Don't mistake progress for permanence." It might remind us that technology doesn't protect against physics, that even intelligence, even self-awareness, cannot outlast imbalance. Because in the end, every civilization, no matter how advanced, depends on the kindness of its environment. And when that kindness fades, the story changes. We don't know if Mars once had civilizations, but we do know that it once had a climate, an ecosystem, and possibly a chain of life long enough to imagine itself as safe, until one day it wasn't. The pattern isn't just cosmic, it's personal. Empires rise and fall for the same reasons planets thrive and die. They lose their balance. There's a quiet humility that comes from looking at Mars this way. It strips away the illusion of human dominance and replaces it with perspective. We are not the masters of the Earth. We are its passengers. And the ship we sail is not unsinkable. Mars is the ship that went ahead and ran aground. And yet, even in its ruin, there's beauty. Its valleys still glisten faintly in the dawn. Its frozen poles still gleam in sunlight. Its mountains, higher than any on Earth, still pierce the sky with quiet grace. It's as if the planet is saying, "See, even endings can be beautiful." Maybe that's what makes Mars so haunting. It isn't just a dead world. It's a world that shows how death can be quiet, graceful, and unresisted. When we look at it, we aren't staring into darkness. We're seeing the shape of time itself. What happens when motion slows, when warmth cools, when life yields to stillness. And maybe, just maybe, we'll understand that this reflection isn't a warning of doom, but an invitation to awareness. The point isn't to fear Mars's fate, the point is to listen to it. Because Mars's silence isn't empty. It's full of lessons. It teaches patience, how long it takes for a planet to forget warmth. It teaches humility, how easily balance tips into ruin. And it teaches gratitude, how precious a breathable sky really is. When you see that red dot glowing faintly in the night, remember, it's not a ghost, it's a memory, a mirror held up to a world that still has time to change. And maybe that's the real reason Mars calls to us, not because we want to conquer it, but because we want to understand ourselves before the mirror fogs over completely. So, tonight, as the planet rises in the east and burns quietly above the horizon, imagine it whispering across the dark. This is what happens when you forget to listen to your world. This is what happens when the cradle breaks. And maybe, just maybe, Earth is still early enough in its story to rewrite the ending. Every story has a beginning, though we rarely know where it truly starts. Sometimes it begins long before the first word is spoken, in the silence that waits for language, in the dust that waits for breath. Maybe life's story began that way too, not here on Earth, but somewhere older, somewhere red, somewhere that has already forgotten us, even as we remember it. For centuries, we've told ourselves that life began in Earth's oceans, lightning striking a chemical soup, molecules linking together into something that could replicate, evolve, and survive. It's a beautiful idea. Spontaneous creation born of chaos and sunlight. But what if that's only half the story? What if the ingredients didn't come from Earth at all, but drifted here from another world? The theory isn't fantasy. It's called panspermia, the idea that life, or its earliest forms, can travel between planets, carried by meteorites or dust or comets. And Mars, sitting just one planet away, would have been the perfect donor. In its youth, Mars was wetter, warmer, and older than Earth. It had rivers, lakes, volcanic warmth, and a long stretch of stable climate. Everything life needs to get started. When asteroids struck its surface, they blasted bits of rock into space. Some of those fragments, protected from radiation inside their mineral shells, drifted for millions of years before falling into Earth's early oceans. And maybe, within those stones, were passengers. Tiny, patient, unassuming. Bacteria, spores, molecules of memory. It sounds like poetry, but it's also science. We've found meteorites on Earth that came from Mars. Some of them even show microscopic features that look uncannily like fossilized cells. If life began there, those rocks were its messengers. And if life took root here because of them, then our family tree has deeper roots than we ever imagined. We are, in that sense, not children of Earth, but of the solar system itself. Look closer at your hand for a moment. The lines on your palm, the warmth beneath your skin. Inside every cell, every atom, there's iron. The same element that gives Mars its color. The same metal that rusted its plains is the one that carries oxygen through your veins. Our blood is the echo of its dust. Our chemistry is its memory. Maybe we didn't just come from Mars. Maybe we are Mars, continued, evolved, transplanted. Not aliens visiting our neighbor, but descendants returning to the ancestral home we left behind. It's an unsettling thought, but also an oddly comforting one, because it means that life doesn't just endure, it travels, it adapts, it takes the long route when it must. A billion-year journey from red dust to blue oceans, from frozen stone to soft skin, from silence to thought. Perhaps this is what evolution really is, not progress, but persistence. A chain of survival so long and so unbroken that even extinction can't sever it, only redirect it. Mars fell silent, but its children learned to speak again, here, beneath a different sky. If that's true, then the story of humanity isn't just local history. It's cosmic inheritance. We are the continuation of something that refused to die. Something that carried its spark through fire and ice, through gravity and vacuum, until it found a place to begin again. Our DNA is a language written by many worlds, and Mars may have provided the first alphabet. Think of it, 4 billion years of continuity, carried not by civilizations, but by cells, each generation passing on the same code, a whisper from the past saying, "Remember me." And in some strange, beautiful way, we did. We looked back toward that faint red light in the sky and felt something stir, a longing, a familiarity, a pull. Memory doesn't always live in the mind. Sometimes it lives in the molecules. Maybe that's why Mars haunts us, because the connection isn't metaphorical, it's biological. When we send robots there, when we dig through its soil and listen for the hum of life, we're not searching for strangers. We're looking for family, for traces of ourselves in an older form. And perhaps that's why, no matter how advanced our machines become, the mission always feels deeply emotional, like returning to the birthplace of a forgotten ancestor, brushing away the dust and saying, "We're still here." It's almost poetic how the universe recycles its miracles. The elements that once belonged to dying stars became planets. The minerals of those planets became bodies. The stories of those bodies became consciousness. And consciousness, in turn, looks back, searching for where it came from, longing to understand what it means to belong. That longing is written in us as surely as the genetic code. It's the echo of the first cell that crawled from water, the first spark that endured the cold, the first world that dared to host life, even if only for a while. There's an old idea in mythology that gods made humanity from clay, from dust. But maybe it wasn't gods at all. Maybe it was just time, pressure, and persistence, the slow sculpting of life from the raw material of another world. The ancient storytellers weren't wrong, only poetic. We were shaped from dust, Martian dust, stardust, cosmic dust. Each breath we take is older than language, so when we look up and see that faint red star glowing in the dark, it's not curiosity that we feel, it's nostalgia, not for what we might find there, but for what we left behind. Because if life truly began on Mars, then death never really won. It just changed addresses. It moved one planet over, grew lungs, learned to dream, and began to wonder where it came from. And now, billions of years later, the child has learned enough to look back and ask if the parent still remembers. Maybe that's what evolution was always leading toward. Not just survival, but reunion. So, tonight as you drift to sleep, think of this. The quiet, improbable continuity between worlds. How the same iron that colors Mars gives you the power to move, to breathe, to live. How the same dust that sleeps beneath its frozen soil might still be dreaming, in you. And maybe that's the real legacy of Mars. Not ruins or relics, but a pulse. A rhythm passed from one planet to another, carried not by machines, but by life itself. There's something beautiful about endings that circle back into beginnings, a kind of symmetry that feels older than language, older than even life itself. Maybe that's how the universe remembers, not by holding on, but by repeating. And perhaps that's what Mars teaches us in the end, that nothing ever truly disappears. It just changes form. It just waits for its next dawn. We began this story looking up, at a faint red point in the sky, glowing quietly among the stars. We saw it as distant, cold, a dead world wrapped in silence. But along the way, we discovered something gentler. Mars is not dead. It's resting. It's waiting for someone to notice, to remember, to continue what it began. For billions of years, the two planets, red and blue, barren and fertile, have watched each other across the dark. They were once twins, cradled in the same dust, orbiting the same star, dreaming under the same light. One went quiet, the other sang. And now, at last, the song is echoing back. When the first human footsteps touch Mars, it won't be a conquest. It will be a return, a reunion between two worlds that have been speaking in silence for eons. The dust will rise, the same dust that once clung to riverbeds and ancient shores, and it will settle softly on a new kind of skin, the skin of those who carry the planet's legacy in their blood. And maybe, in that moment, Mars will remember. We like to think of progress as forward motion, new tools, new frontiers, new discoveries. But perhaps progress is also remembering where we came from. Perhaps the future isn't ahead of us at all, but waiting quietly behind us, in the places we've forgotten. Every step we take on Mars will be a step backward in time, into the memory of a planet that once held oceans, clouds, and maybe even thought. Each footprint will press against 4 billion years of silence and whisper, "We came back." There's a kind of poetry in that the child of a world could one day return home, carrying all the complexity, all the memory, all the stories that the parent once lost. If Mars was the first cradle, Earth was the second. And now, we are the hands reaching back across the centuries of dust to cradle it in return. Life, it seems, is not a straight line. It's a loop. Think about how fragile that loop really is. A few degrees colder, and Earth might have ended the same way. A few million years slower, and Mars might have kept its warmth, its seas, its chance at evolution. So close, so small a difference, and yet, that difference defined everything that followed. It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that all of history, all of life, all of consciousness is the result of such thin margins. And yet, within those margins, the universe found room for thought, for art, for love. When you look at Mars now, that faint red star rising over the horizon, you're seeing more than rock and dust. You're seeing time itself reflected back. You're seeing the part of existence that refuses to vanish, even when the light fades. Mars is memory made visible. It's what happens when a world keeps its scars and calls them beauty. And in that way, it isn't just a planet. It's a mirror of the universe itself. Because every ending, no matter how final, eventually becomes the soil for something new. Even silence becomes a canvas for sound. Even dust remembers light. That's the rhythm of existence: creation, loss, renewal. Planets are born, live, and die. But life keeps finding a way to begin again, each time learning a little more about how to last. We are part of that rhythm. The latest note in a song that started before Earth even existed. Perhaps Mars didn't end. It simply continued in a different form, in the oceans of Earth, in the breath of animals, in the spark of thought that led us to wonder where we came from. Maybe every time we dream of other worlds, every time we look up in quiet awe, we are reliving Mars's own imagination, the longing it once had for the stars before the cold took hold. Maybe that longing was never lost. It just changed shape, learned language, became curiosity. And now, curiosity is going home. Someday, far in the future, we'll build cities on Mars, not grand, golden cities, but small, quiet ones. Habitats pressed into the dust, glowing faintly under the pale sun. Children will look up at the pinkish sky and ask their parents, "Did people really come from Earth?" And the parents will smile and say, "Yes, and maybe from here too." They'll grow up calling two planets home, and for the first time in billions of years, the solar system will feel whole again. The cradle that broke will have a voice once more, and maybe, just maybe, when those children breathe in the thin Martian air, they'll feel something stir, a faint recognition, as if the planet itself is welcoming them back. Because perhaps Mars has been lonely all this time, waiting for the life it once seeded to return and remind it that it mattered. When we touch its soil, when we speak its name aloud, we'll be completing a sentence that began long before humanity. A sentence written in dust, paused in silence, and now finally spoken again. Mars is not our destination. It's our reflection. A reminder that every world, every civilization, every life exists in the fragile balance between memory and forgetting. We are the second dawn, the continuation of the light that Mars once carried. And if we are wise enough to listen, maybe we'll learn how to keep that light burning a little longer this time. So, tonight as you drift into sleep, imagine it. A red horizon warming in the cold. A small sun rising over a planet once thought lifeless. A new dawn beginning, not for one world, but for both. Because perhaps the universe doesn't end. It just exhales. And each breath, each dawn, each civilization is the universe remembering itself again.